Hi, I'm Annette, the director of the Texas Fashion Collection. One of the most important functions of the TFC is to host researchers who come into our space to work with our artifacts and think about the ways makers in the past have engaged with materials, silhouettes, construction, and cultural motifs. So today we're going to be looking at a dress by Hanae Mori, one of the most important figures in Japanese fashion history and global fashion history. Hanae Mori is an important figure for us to look into because she was the first person from Japan to serve as a fashion designer and move her work from Japan to Euro-American fashion spaces, then launching herself as the first Asian designer to be part of the elite world of haute couture in Paris. Hanae Mori was really immersed in the world of Japanese culture and tradition. One of the places we can see that most clearly with this work is in the textile. So here, if we look at this mini dress, what we're looking at is this really ornate brocade. Brocades are really difficult to wear because they're so thick. So in most fashion design, they're only used for really elevated garments. What we're seeing here is a brocade that was initially created to be turned into an obi, or a belt, that would be worn with a kimono. If we look at this example of an obi from our collection, we can see a more traditional use for this textile. What you see here is a really ornate brocade fabric, densely woven with really ornate floral motifs that are represented. These floral motifs on these brocades that are used for obis typically have cultural significance. So what we're seeing here are stylized chrysanthemums, which are a motif that represent the Japanese imperial family. You can see looking at both these pieces together that the textiles are similar, and that's because Hanae Mori started with a textile intended to be turned into an obi, and she transformed that material into a dress instead. In the 1960s, when Hanae Mori made this dress, Japanese traditional dress was really changing. Historically, people in Japan wore kimonos, but by the 1960s, a lot of people were transitioning to wearing Euro-American style clothing. This was really a challenge for Japanese textile producers because the people who made these really ornate brocades no longer had a market for the textiles they were making that were stemming from centuries of traditions in Japan. This was a way for Hanae Mori to really celebrate her own traditional heritage while also creating a market for these textile producers whose businesses were flagging. So if we look at her dress next to a mini dress from a designer based in Paris, we'll notice a lot of similarities. Hanae Mori was leaving behind the kimono as a form of dress and instead looking to mini dresses for inspiration. Hanae Mori's design practice was based in Japan up until the 1960s, but after that point she decided she wanted to expand outside of just Japan and approach audiences in Europe and America. When she did that, she wanted to create a melding of cultures, thinking about East meeting West, and she transformed her design practice to really meet that new audience. When Hanae Mori decided to expand her design practice, one of the first places she went was Dallas, Texas. In the mid-1960s, she started showing her pieces at Neiman Marcus, a Dallas-based department store, and that's where this dress was first introduced to American audiences. Because of Hanae Mori's success in Dallas and places like New York and in Los Angeles, she expanded her practice even further, and in the mid-1970s became the first Asian designer to be part of the elite world of haute couture in Paris. While she was working in Paris, she continued to draw on her own Japanese cultural heritage, celebrating motifs that were commonly seen in kimono fabric. Here you can see things like flowers, butterflies, which were her logo, and even symbols that are commonly associated with Japan, like Mount Fuji and cherry blossoms. Hanae Mori is a great example for us to look to see a designer who was really drawing from something that authentically is hers, but thinking about how to translate those ideas to broader audiences. She took something that was really meaningful to her and wanted to make it meaningful to other people, and through that process of translation, made her own cultural heritage exciting to people who might not have encountered it before. Hanae Mori is just one of many designers represented in our collection who engage in this form of transformation in their work. We might also look to people like Todd Oldham, a Texan designer who in the 1990s was known for taking everyday common motifs and materials around us and translating them in his high fashion practice, showing his work on the runways of New York Fashion Week. And the piece we're looking at here, you might notice that the textile reminds us of something very familiar, shredded paper. Todd Oldham received a gift that was wrapped in this shredded paper and thought it was so beautiful that he paused to take a photograph of it and then created an entire textile collection that was featured in this runway collection. We might also look to the example of Greg Lauren, the nephew of the famous designer Ralph Lauren, an American designer who really thinks about a lot of everyday materials around us that relate closely to American identity. Greg Lauren is very interested in American identity and wants to upcycle materials that we often see just on the edges of American culture. He uses materials that are everyday and commonplace to us, things like quilts or maybe even used army tents, which you can see here. The canvas has holes and parts of it are fraying on the edges. Greg Lauren's way of reminding us that these materials around us have lives, and he, in upcycling them, reminds us to look at them closely. Transformation plays an important role in many designers and creative professionals' work. It's really wonderful to see examples from Hanae Mori, who's really thinking about her own cultural heritage, and designers like Todd Oldham and Greg Lauren, who are thinking about everyday materials around us. Every one of us is connected with materiality and meaning, and it's really through transformation that we can make these meanings accessible to more people.